Welcome, everyone. Let's bow in. And welcome to the class, The Buddhist Path of Awakening, which is being based on a 3-volume series, 3 volumes of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa. This is a digest of talks that he gave over 15 years on the 3 yanas of Tibetan Buddhism, the 3 vehicles, they're called. The Hinayana, which literally means lesser vehicle, but he preferred to call foundational vehicle, the Mahayana, or the great vehicle, and then the Vajrayana, which is also called the Tantrayana and the Mantrayana. And as Vajrayana, it means the indestructible vehicle. So we are working our way through the 2nd volume of the Mahayana, and tonight we're going to be discussing chapter 18 on the subject of emptiness. And I will, at this point, turn it over to Barry. Barry and I are both going to speak on this.
Okay. Yeah, seems that it's time to talk about emptiness, Shunyata. This is actually, emptiness is at the heart of the Mahayana. And it's also not that easy to understand until it's experienced. In fact, later in the chapter, he says, it is very difficult to grasp a principle such as Shunyata. It is not something you can do. However, awareness or mindfulness practice is something you can do. So don't let it throw you. So, emptiness. What is Shonyata empty of? He says it is empty of holding back, empty of maintaining oneself. Essentially, it is empty of me and mine. The teaching of emptiness is not a denial of the existence of the physical world. That is something that comes up sometimes. And the Shunyata experience is not one of entering some sort of formless void, devoid of meaning. That's nihilism. So what's left? He says emptiness is not merely negation, because the Bodhisattva path is a positive state of existence with a lot of creativity. However, if you do not give up on the idea of me and mine, you could be in a difficult situation. That is an understatement, actually. So, once again, we're reminded of the importance of the Hinayana, of Shamatha Vipassana practice. He says here, you need to keep referring back to the Hinayana practice of Shamatha Vipassana, which continue to be extremely important. In the Mahayana, you are transcending the mental gymnastics aspect of the Hinayana path. So in the Hinayana, there is a kind of a technical aspect of this, and we're struggling to trying to understand and come to an awareness of when we're present, when we're not. And he says mental gymnasticism, funny thing, seems to come from the idea that you have to do something because it is good for you. So this is about attitude, or the view that we bring to the practice. The idea of emptiness may seem mysterious, but in fact, examining the workings of our own mind, thinking about thinking, is mysterious. It is actually a mysterious and fragile endeavor. So a heavy-handed or rigid or strict approach is usually not very helpful. I don't know if this is really correct, but I would say that our untamed mind is almost like an untamed animal. It must be approached gently, slowly, with a light touch, and a great deal of patience. Now, he says that with any practice on the path, any practice, how you relate with it makes an enormous difference. If you become dogmatic and snobbish about a practice, thinking it is the higher way, that you have tuned in to the proper way to do things, that may become a problem. Another understatement, in my opinion. So it is also not helpful to hold on to an expectation of what the experience of Shunyata or bodhicitta would be like. Because if you could really know what it's going to be like, then you'd be enlightened. So better to just have confidence in the path and continue. One might imagine Shunyata as some mystical state where you're floating above the world of suffering. But on the contrary, the experience of Shunyata is absolutely ordinary in a way. It's as ordinary as waking up in the morning because it is already there within us. In this reading elsewhere, he says, life is infested with Shunyata type experiences. So normally, these just come and go, and we don't really take note of them because our allegiance does not lie with Shunyata. It's still an allegiance to our preoccupations, to the spinning of the ego. Now, on the other hand, a fully realized experience of Shunyata can be quite dramatic and vivid because it is something we're not accustomed to. But it is not a special state. It is simply being awake. It's not special, actually, because special is a description that we apply. So in Shunyata, that just isn't happening. One is simply here, awake and present, without any reference point. Now he says, experientially, emptiness is described as complete threefold purity. So in that sense, the practice of Shunyata does not exist. See, the threefold purity is something we covered a couple of weeks ago in the chapter Indestructible Wakefulness. And the three purities are the non-existence of the actor, the non-existence of the action, and the non-existence of the object of the action. So as long as there is a self, me, then an actor exists. And that actor is taking an action directed to a non-self out there. So all of this comes from the belief that this me we all experience is real. It is the same self that generates the three poisons. You may recall there's the wheel of life, and in the center there's the three poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance, represented by a rooster, a snake, and a pig. That the mind, let's put it this way, the ego is the mind that perceives things not as they are, but as they relate to me. So everything that presents itself to our awareness is evaluated. If we think it has value, we want to possess it, we're drawn to it, that's passion. If it's something that we feel is dangerous or threatening in some way, then we try to push it away or destroy it, that's aggression. Or if we determine that it's something that doesn't have that much importance and we can safely ignore, ignorance. In Shunyata, there is no reference to I or other. So the threefold purity, there is no actor, there's no action, there's no object of the action. There is no passion, aggression, or ignorance. So how does this happen? How do you get there? Practice, practice, practice. It's a process. It's a gradual path. I mean, this schema of the Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana is also referred to as the gradual three yana path. So, and in that progression, in the beginning, as we quiet the mind and thoughts recede into the background and no longer command our attention, we can become more present. With shamatha, we learn to quiet the mind, and that starts to let the light in. We begin to free ourselves from self-doubt and criticism. Then with vipassana, our awareness expands as self-reference begins to erode. So we become less interested in me, in what's in it for me. This allows genuine compassion, genuine friendliness and warmth to emerge. He says, non-reference point comes from openness, friendliness, and warmth. It comes from compassion, which is absolutely necessary, and compassion comes from awareness. So, he says, we have to refer back to vipassana. For if you have not developed awareness, you will not develop friendliness, you will not develop non-reference point either. Okay, let me see. All right. Shunyata, he says, is a meditative experience that regards neither the awareness nor the achievement of awareness as important. Your mind is not focused on any technique. This is meditation without technique or goal. Your mind is just open, simply being or non-being. You could think of this as a deeper kind of relaxation, actually. Relaxing the tensions of striving and of obtaining and of hanging on to some ideals that you have, of just relaxing and just letting it be, letting it go. He says, when awareness is no longer a battle, warmth arises as a natural process. See, as long as there's struggle, that I'm trying to achieve awareness, there's little room for anything else but my struggle. And awareness is then all about me trying to achieve it. So you develop warmth, I'm reading here, you develop warmth through dissolving the possessiveness with which you are being aware and the world being strange. Dissolving the possessiveness of you being aware and the world being strange. Now, the Shunyata experience can be confusing. I mean, after all, the reference points that you've relied on all your life up until now are gone. You might not even be able to answer the question, who am I? So now what? And he says, actually, you may find yourself very confused, wondering what to do. And his answer, you just sit like a rock. You can do that. You can just sit there and do it. So the Shonyata state of meditation is not something that you can just turn on or will yourself into experiencing. You may have an expectation that you could just cut to the chase and forget about all this tiresome meditation and practice. If I just try hard enough or just find that secret sauce, zap, I'm enlightened, or something like that. But he says, I love this. The craving for sudden experience could instead lead to sudden nuttiness. And then he goes on to relay this story of this meditator coming back to his cabin and encountering some yogurt and going crazy. So finally, the three types of emptiness. He says, the Shunyata state of meditation is described as externally empty, internally empty, and absolutely empty. So externally empty means that the phenomenal world and the sensory perceptions are seen as equally empty, although they may be quite vivid and colorful. This is like, the analogy that we've used from time to time in talking about the Vipassana experience of like being on a train watching a landscape go by. This is kind of what's being described here. This is where you're sitting in the train watching the landscape roll by, sometimes dull, sometimes vivid, always changing. But there's still an observer. Internally empty means that the internal world of emotions and even physical sensations is also seen as empty. Vivid maybe, but empty. So here is where we start to experience our own internal landscape as ever-changing display. There may still be an observer there. Absolutely empty means that, as he puts it, there is nothing particularly to do. There is nothing to work on, no one to make a reference point, nothing whatsoever. That's all I got.
Thank you, Barry. Well, this is the beginning of our introduction to the concept of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. Shunya means void or empty. Ta is a nominative, turns it into a noun, so it becomes emptiness. Same thing in Tibetan. Tongnyi. Tong means empty. Nyi is a nominative. The main thing that is being referred to here, what is empty of, is it's empty of I and other. It's saying that reality is not, literally not, what we've been thinking it is. We constantly think of the world and our experience in terms of I and other. We are an I that is moving through this world of others. And we have a constant and ever-changing relationship with others. And these relationships, fundamentally, as Barry pointed out, take the shape of the three poisons. You either want something to augment your existence, you pull it towards you, you don't like it, you think it's going to be a deficit and you push it away from you. or you're indifferent and you're neutral. These are the three poisons. And this world of I and other only arises in thought. That's where it lives. That's where it takes place. And what the doctrine of emptiness is saying is that these thoughts are not true. As Trungpa Rinpoche says at one point in there, that the thoughts of I and other, especially I, because then there's other, are no more real than dreams of a flying saucer. They're total fictions. And yet, we're constantly thinking of them, and we're constantly organizing our activities in terms of these thoughts of I and other. This is samsara. Because when we're engaged in the thought of I and its relationship to other, that relationship is fraught. We are constantly worried about the existence of I, rightly so, because I is just a creation, a mental creation. And the minute we stop creating it, it's gone. And so it needs constant maintenance to stay alive. Constantly having something out there. If that's out there, that proves that I'm here because I'm the observer. And so we're constantly going back and forth, back and forth. That's there, therefore I'm here. And we walk through our lives in constant I-other relationships that take the form of the three poisons and that are fraught with anxiety because we're worried about I. Rightly so. I doesn't really exist. It's just a fiction, like a flying saucer. But we've got to try and maintain it alive. That's what I wants to do, wants to be maintained. And so we walk through our lives constantly trying to bolster, to buttress, to reinforce, to make healthy this I, which is a very painful proposition, fraught with, in varying degrees, with suffering. Sometimes it's very mild. Oh, I don't think I'll have that bonbon. Oops, somebody else took it. Or sometimes it's major. I've got to have a super major operation now and I might die in it. I might die. And so we are caught. This is the essence of samsara, to be caught in this I-other belief, which only lives in dreams, in thoughts, in the dreams which inhabit our minds and which come and go in this space of awareness. And this space is fundamentally empty of I and other. It's just a constant arising and passing of the phenomenal world, of the objects of the senses which come and go, instant by instant, like these words, like this gesture of the hand, like the feeling of your bottom in the seat now that I mention it, wherever you're sitting. All of these things are arising and passing in this present moment. And then there are these thoughts which say, how am I doing? Do I understand this? I don't know if I'm getting anything out of this. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Maybe I'm going to get enlightened. All kinds of things. The Buddha taught the teaching of Shunyata partway through his career. Initially, he didn't. But one day, at a place called the Vulture Peak Mountain, which you can visit, it's outside of, it's in Bihar, outside of what's now called Rajagriha. It's in Rajagriha, the king's domain, outside of, just north of where the Buddha achieved enlightenment. And there on top of this mountain, so-called, the Vulture Peak Mountain, it's actually more like a bump, he gave the teaching of Shunyata. And this is memorialized in the Prajnaparamita literature, with which it's in many different versions, that literature. The one that you're probably most familiar with is the Heart Sutra. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha, that's the king's domain, at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. So he gives this teaching of emptiness. And what it's, the myth is, or whether it's true or not, is that the students of his, some of the students of his who were so attached to the lower teachings, the Hinayana teachings, when they heard this, they had heart attacks, the arhats. And so, according to myth, again, maybe myth, who knows, he gave these teachings. He knew that the people of his time weren't quite ready for them yet, and he gave the Prajnaparamita teachings, as I've said before, to the Nagas who dwell in the watery places. Especially he gave them to the Nagas who dwell in the oceans to keep in safekeeping until the world would be ready for them. And the world was ready for them, supposedly, in about the first and second centuries AD, actually second and third centuries AD, when a great teacher named Nagarjuna went down into the watery depths and tricked the Nagas into giving him the Prajnaparamita teachings, and he brought them back. Now, actually, the oldest version of these teachings appeared about the 2nd century BC. It's called the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 verses. That's the oldest of the different versions, but you can get the Prajnaparamita in 25,000 verses. It's published. I've got it sitting over here on my bookcase. In 100,000 verses, I don't own that one. And take a couple of bookcases, I guess. And you can get it in one page, which is the Heart Sutra. And you can even have the Prajnaparamita in one letter, the letter A of the Sanskrit alphabet. Symbolizes the whole Prajnaparamita. And the Prajnaparamita is this teaching about Shunyata. And what it is fundamentally saying is that nothing that we thought had true existence does. Nothing, and what true existence is defined as having three qualities. One, that a thing that exists is single, unitary. It's not two. But everything is multiple. I mean, I'm made up of gazillions of cells, which are made up of gazillions of atoms, and actually atoms are made up of quarks, and there's finally no particle that you can truly find in modern day physics. So everything is multiple, it's not one. Number two, that everything that exists independently. And yet, nothing that we ever encounter in our lives arises alone, independent. It arises as part of a matrix of events and phenomena, like this image on the computer screen with the walls and the windows behind me and the sweater and everything, and the sounds and the physical sensations that you're feeling, all of it arising interdependently. And the third thing is that things exist over time. And this too is a myth. It's simply a concept, an idea, because what we truly experience, the real reality of our experience, is only this now, here, in the moment. And the idea that this bell ringer exists over time, or that this person exists over time, is just that, an idea. So nothing has these three qualities, which we assume things do have, in that they're single, independent, and exist over time. In contrast, everything is multiple, in fact, infinitely multiple. It is utterly dependent on everything else. Everything arises in a matrix, and it's continually changing instant by instant. You can't find anything that isn't changing, that has stayed the same even for a nanosecond. It's just a constant presentation of this. And that this is the real, and that this is what is called Shunyata. And it's empty of these two things, the existence, remember, these three qualities. It's empty of the existence of I. I is just a fiction that we say from time to time, and it's empty of other. Other is likewise a fiction that we utter from time to time. I like you. I want a steak. I, other. And this I-other relationship is a complete fiction, just like the assertion that there is a flying saucer in the sky. It's just made up. It's a dream. It's a false statement. And when we stop making those false statements and we start living the world devoid of those, we are entering the world of Shunyata. He mentions the practice of shamatha vipassana as being so important, and it certainly is, because we could get caught up in the idea of shunyata, which is just a sort of another philosophy, another conceptual framework for describing reality. But when we practice shamatha and vipassana, we come back to the real reality. We come back to this present moment, cutting through dreams of I and other, and we awaken to this world as it truly is. This is vipassana. This is true awareness. We start to see this world stripped of the myth of I and other. Now, Shunyata, that concept, is the central concept of the Mahayana path. In fact, the entrance into the Mahayana, which is called the first stage, the first bhumi, the name for that first bhumi is pramudita, which means great joy. And the reason that it's great joy is because this is where the bodhisattva discovers freedom from I and other, emptiness. So the whole Mahayana takes place, you might say, within the atmosphere of emptiness, of shunyata, empty of I and other. I and other is beginning to dissolve, to disappear, and a different kind of reality is emerging. What is this? What is one of the main characteristics of this different kind of reality? And this isn't discussed much in the Mahayana. It's discussed much more, well, in the later stages of the Mahayana and also in the Vajrayana, is that in the absence of I and other, this phenomenal world, as it arises and passes in the present moment, emerges very, very, very vividly. In fact, that vividness is called luminosity. It's clear light, which early translators, when they came to that term, ursa in Tibetan, Prabhasvara in Sanskrit, they thought literally that people were going to see a clear light, like they're going to see this white light, and then they would be enlightened. That's not it. It's talking about how in the absence of I and other, which is a constant back and forth, it keeps us so busy mentally. How am I doing? I. And what I'm doing relative to that, other. Go back and forth, and we see the world through the veils of judgment, good and bad. And these veils are like sunglasses. They gray things out. And when we begin to strip that away, this world emerges very, very vividly, luminously. So much so that in the later stages of the Mahayana path, and especially in Tantra, they talk about the union, the bonding, the flip side of the same coin of emptiness and luminosity. This is why he says there that this is not a nothing which is a void. It's a nothing which is full of life. It's a nothing which is full of the phenomenal world. Because having stripped away all of our busyness, our mental preoccupations with I and other, which is samsara, it's suffering, it's unhappiness. Stripping that away, this world emerges with vividness and beauty. And all of us have experienced this at times, when suddenly our minds cleared and we saw something, whatever it may be, each one of us differently, so vividly, in a way that was moving. It was beautiful in its vividness. And that isn't to say that it had to be necessarily beautiful like a Rembrandt or like a beautiful sunset. It could be a dog shit in the street, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, that emerges vividly, stripped of the belief of I and other. They call emptiness sometimes the twofold emptiness, and they mean not only empty of I and other, but they say it's empty. It's called Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. He holds this sword, which cuts through belief in I and other. Those beliefs are also called primitive beliefs about reality. That's believing in me, and conflicting emotions. Because when you believe in other relative to I, then you're constantly caught in these conflicting emotions. And Manjushri's sword, the sword of Prajna, sword which reveals emptiness, cuts through those two beliefs. Primitive beliefs about reality, which is beliefs in I and other, and the conflicting emotions, which are the relationships between I and other, which are so painful. So Shunyata, it's really the atmosphere, the world in which the Bodhisattva moves. Increasingly, as the Bodhisattva progresses through the 10 bhumis, the stages of the Bodhisattva path. Now, the belief in I is so persistent and so subtle and so tricky that it continues. It's not like the Bodhisattva gets to the first bhumi and then it's gone. Because what he does is he or she, they get to the first bhumi and they experience emptiness. And then there's this voice in the back of the head and says, ooh, I've just experienced emptiness. See? I, again, now it's I and emptiness, I and my spiritual path. And that has to wear out. And that's what happens. It wears out continually throughout the Mahayana. That's why the Bodhisattva isn't fully enlightened. Because the Bodhisattva is appreciating the spiritual progress on the path, or the lack of it, complaining about it. And that has to fall away. That's another subtler version of I. And increasingly, as the Bodhisattva enters this world of emptiness of I and other, this world of vividness, the Bodhisattva is coming to life, is encountering real life. Because the conceptual world is dead. It's just ideas, just concepts. And that real life is the warmth, the friendliness, the beauty that Trungpa Rinpoche is referring to in this chapter. It's a enjoyment and a love of living that is arising in the practitioner at this point. It's the absence of struggle that allows this to blossom. The absence of false belief in this fiction that we've been living, this horrible fiction of I and other and everything that is involved with that. All the things that we are afraid of, we hate. So there's some other principles that we're going to be dealing with as we go along here. I just want to look at my notes for a second and see what I'm leaving out. Yeah, regarding the stages of the path and the falling away of the ambition, the spiritual ambition, he says, the spiritual desire to attain enlightenment accompanies the entire bodhisattva path, getting thinner and thinner. And there is also the desire to help other people. That's good, because that takes away from your self-consciousness and your self-centeredness. But those ideas are based on the perspective of non-reference point. So it is not at all personal. Wow. And that has to do, Think about it. You forgive me for saying that. Think about it. If you let go of the notion of I, the world is very different. It is not at all personal. The whole thing is based on impersonality, he says. We're living in a world without I. This world, right now, without I. And all the games that I plays with others. So he also says, once you get into Shunyata, you are less aware of the doctrine. It is more a question of just being. This is really a state of being. The Bodhisattva path, which takes place within this atmosphere of Shunyata, as I say, the further you go on the Bodhisattva path, the more luminosity comes into it. In fact, in the Vajrayana, luminosity is dominant. They still talk about emptiness, of course. It's a descriptor of reality, empty of I and other. But now they're more concerned with the vividness of this phenomenal world as it arises in the mind of clear seeing, devoid of I and other, devoid of the myth, of the mistake, of the error, and the activity of I and other, that the world is seen as being very, very vivid. That's why there are all these images, like the one behind Peter there, of Milarepa, and of things on my wall, which I guess you probably can't see very well. Yeah, it's the video, it's not very good, but I've got images of these tantric images. They're so vivid and colorful and outrageous because the world emerges so vividly, powerfully, colorfully. And in addition, there are other qualities that begin to emerge as we begin on the Mahayana path to go deeper and deeper into the world of the real, beyond stripped of I and other. The first that Barry mentioned is compassion. That as we encounter this beautiful, vivid world, our hearts open to it. Ineluctably, you can't avoid it. And that's the compassion. At the same time, you begin to see the world as it truly is. Stripped of hope and fear, stripped of judgment, good and bad, which always has to do with I and other. And that's called prajna, transcendent seeing, knowledge. Prajna, super knowledge, seeing the world as it is. Ta-ta-ta in Sanskrit. These go together. Shunyata is the atmosphere within which prajna and compassion are joined like two sides of the same coin. And then finally, the third quality that evolves and grows in the Mahayana is skillful means. Because now you're no longer playing the game of ego, of I other. That's what ego is. Now you're relating to the world as it truly is, and this is called skill, that you can actually relate to it appropriately instead of self-centeredly. And that's skillful means, upaya. And when a person behaves in that manner with skillful means, they radiate enlightened mind, awakened mind, because that's where they're coming from. And their actions communicate that. A different way of being, a different way of relating, different values. There's a gentleness, an openness to all things, an intelligence kindness, and utter clear seeing, which can be scary for the people around that person. And as I say this, I'm thinking of Trungpa Rinpoche and the way he manifested in all those ways. So, emptiness, Shunyata, it can't be contrived. It's not something we make. It's something we come to. We acknowledge, we discover, and then settle into. It's already here. And any attempt to make it happen, to achieve it, obscures it. Because that's ego again. That's I and others. So any attempt to make something better obscures emptiness. It is the foundation of what we are, already here, perfect. And our attempts to see it just get in the way. So what we do is we practice shamatha and vipassana, and we are relaxing into our natural mind, the mind which can then be one with emptiness, and even beyond emptiness, because emptiness in itself is still a path concept. It's still the idea of waking up from the dream of I and other, and ultimately we let go of that and we just live in this real world. That quality, I'm going to end really with this. That path quality of continually letting go of the attempt to make something happen characterizes one's progress on the path to the higher and higher stages of the path, that more and more one is simply coming back to the real, waking up to the real. As Rinpoche said it, shifting your allegiance from the dreams of I and other and self-aggrandizement and spiritual progress and spiritual understanding and all of that, shifting your allegiance from that to being awake in the present moment. And the only way to do it is through, well, you can study and that helps, but the main way we do it is through the practice of meditation, shamatha and vipassana, which ultimately lead us into this as we relax more and more into awareness in the present moment. So I'll stop there and we could have a discussion.
Shiji.
Yes. Let's say you are aware of your ambition in your practice to attain spiritual progress. Do you see that and then continue to practice?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what you just described a bodhisattva.
Okay. So can I understand that as that's to a greater degree common to bodhisattvas, is that ambition, like it's there, but they still just go along with it?
It wears out. It becomes thinner and thinner along the path. It becomes subtler and subtler, that ambition. That ambition is a constant, it's a manifestation of ego's self-concern. But the Bodhisattva has realized that ego is a myth, that it's a lie, that it doesn't exist any more than flying saucers do. Who knows? Maybe flying saucers have a better chance of existing than ego does. You know, and so the habit, you see, of believing in I and other is so persistent. We've got a habit that it continually comes up again and again, but it's wearing out because we have begun to realize, we've begun to hear the message that this is not true. And when the more we hear that message that this is not true, the more we begin to shift our allegiance to what is true, which is this world in the present moment, now, as it arises so beautifully. There is no past and future, and yet the past and future are contained in this present moment. We all got to this meeting tonight through a series of steps. You can't remember them, and you just remember little fractions of them. And you know that when this ends, you're going to go on to other activities. That's the future. And yet, all we ever experience, the reality is this. And the more we begin to shift our allegiance to this, the thinner and thinner ego becomes. This is really what the Bodhisattva path is about. It's wearing it out. Until at the last stage, they say, the last bhumi, the 10th bhumi, is called the cloud of Dharma, the Dharma Mega. And what they say is one of the little catchphrases, I guess you'd call it, is that the Bodhisattva at that stage of the path realizes that they are about to achieve enlightenment, full-blown enlightenment, but that something is holding them back. And then they realize what it is that's holding them back. And what it is the effort to achieve enlightenment. And at that point, snap, that's what propels them into full-blown enlightenment. Then they can let it go completely. That it was just a waste of time.
Okay.
Utterly a waste of time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for a great question.
Mark.
Oh, hi, John. Thank you for great talk. And I'm sorry. Thank you, Barry, of course. I just was, now there is no I, but there is the observer. Or is there, because I was thinking because you're experiencing the moment, but with no past, no future, no story, no samsara. Is that right or wrong?
I'll introduce a tantric term. It's called run rik. Rik is pure seeing, it's true seeing. Run is self. So this is self-seeing, and what it's saying is that you don't need an external observer at all, that all of this is known non-dually by itself.
Right.
It's self-knowing. All of this, everything, the five senses and mind are all self-known in the present moment. And you don't need an external observer. There is no external observer. In fact, it's just a fiction. It's a mental creation of thought. Trungpa Rinpoche called it the hitchhiker. Right? Because it's this thing that's on your shoulder catching a ride, and you don't need it. You can observe it, comes and goes. So that term, Ran Rik, it means that everything is self-luminous, self-knowingness, without an I other.
Thank you.
This is core doctrine. Thank you. It's amazing that we're getting to this stuff now.
I love it.
This is the real path.
Alejandro's had his hand up for a while.
Alejandro.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Barry, for that wonderful reading. One of the things about Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche that always connected with me very strongly was his capacity to incorporate many different meanings or way to interpret things into the writings. And as Barry was reading the end of the chapter, the 3 types of emptiness, there was this echo that just kept ringing for me. I'm not really sure if I'm trying to present a question or not, but at the end it says, externally empty means that the phenomenal world and the sensory perceptions are seen as equally empty, although they may be vivid and colorful. And in my mind, that just sounded like, well, isn't that Mahamudra? In the sense of, it's vivid and colorful. It manifests very luminously, but it seems to co-emerge with its emptiness, with the freedom from meaning some kind of other symbolism. It's almost like it holds no other symbol but itself on its own. Second part of that goes internally empty, means that the internal world of emotions is also seen as empty, vivid maybe, but it's still empty. And instantly, this flash just happened to me. Well, isn't that suction just mind? Isn't that suction? Isn't just mind by itself just being that sense of empty of its own sort of symbolism or sort of meaning or interpretation of something superimposed upon it? And when I heard the presentation of absolutely emptiness, that there is nothing particular to do, just seemed to me, or it meant to me, that they do not necessarily clash or mean different things, but both the outside representation of that emptiness or also the way that it is interpreted almost seem to contribute to one another in the way of understanding one versus the other. And I was wondering if that is anywhere near the ballpark. Is that just a projection? Am I just making that up?
Here's the way I read it. The first 2 have to do with the lower Vajrayana vehicles. By lower, I mean anything in the Nyingma scheme, there are 6. And anything up to and including the first part of the last vehicle called Dzogchen, Great Perfection. All of these have to do with, still in a subtler and subtler way, getting somewhere, applying a cause and achieving an effect, which entails that the practitioner feels they haven't arrived. They're still trying to get there. Only the last teachings of the last yana, the Dzogchen teachings, are about what it's like when there is no attempt to get anywhere. Now, the Mahamudra teachings come close to that. And that's what you referred to when you talked about externally. And that really has to do, you see, with seeing the vividness of this world as it arises in emptiness. That's what Mahamudra is all about. The extraordinary beauty, and that there is tremendous devotion, because the devotion is giving up of ego and love of the world. And what comes along with that is beginning to appreciate what's going on internally. That what's going on, and that's why in the lower yanas, so-called lower yanas, they're still very profound. They're talking about the emotions and what's going on in your body as being wisdoms. Once they're stripped of their I-other orientation, they are revealed as the wisdoms. And then finally, he says, absolutely, there is nothing particular to do nothing to work on, no reference point at all. That's pure Dzogchen.
Mm.
Now, you'll hear that in the lower yanas as well, but at the Dzogchen level, at the great perfection level, they really mean it. And here's the thing about Trungpa Rinpoche. He always spoke from the point of view of Dzogchen, I feel. And so do others. There's a fellow, Stuart Friedman, who wrote a book called The Backward Path of Ati. And basically it's saying the same thing, that Trungpa Rinpoche, the way he taught the beginning teachings from an Ati perspective. And so it was all leading up to Ati sort of in a backwards way. Ati is Dzogchen. For those who, Ati is the Sanskrit, and Dzogchen is the Tibetan. And it's usually, both of them are translated as great perfection in English. So we're getting into very ethereal realms here, or realms that we haven't really learned the language for yet. It's not so much that they're ethereal, is that we're just beginning to learn it. And we need to learn the language, like the term emptiness is so key. It goes all the way through, right up to Dzogchen. Although in Dzogchen, they don't really talk about emptiness anymore. They rename it at a subtler level.
It is really powerful also, the presentation of how the verses of the Prajnaparamita can all be condensed into just the sound of ah.
Yeah.
I actually enjoy that, because I work as a Spanish tutor. I teach Spanish, and when I work with my students, I introduce the Dharma a lot, just subconsciously, without really mentioning anything. And in Spanish, we have the two words for here, which are acá and aquí. And usually I have students that struggle with figuring out the difference. And I ended up telling them well, aquí, the E sound at the end, means right here. It's tangible and it's easy to understand because the E sound is very sharp and poignant and precise. And acá means somewhere around here. It's undescribed, undisclosure. So the E sound is very precise, tangible, noticeable. And ah, the sound of ah at the end of the word means somewhere around here, broad, non-tangible. And it is actually precisely the Prajnaparamita that inspired me to present it like that. And usually some of my clients and some of my students, they don't really know about this, but they tell me, oh, okay, so the ah sound, just even the pronunciation of it feels so spacious, so undisclosed, so empty. So it's very nice to hear that, always. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Alejandro. We've got Fred and then Stefan.
Yeah, I had a question, or perhaps an observation about, how prajna, skillful means, lead into emptiness. Like the more that I'll dare to say I, get sharper and sharper with my intellect, and people need my help, the more I come to realize this. What I don't know what the word for it is at this moment. It's like, but there's a saying, a cliche: no good deed goes unpunished. And this kind of reminds me of like the sword of Manjushri. It's like I'm slicing someone else's problem, but then I'm also slicing my ego. But then the more and more that this happens, it just doesn't hurt as much anymore. Yeah, is that, I'd love to hear your view on that.
Well, sounds right, Fred. I have no comment. Further comment.
Thank you. This was a fantastic talk, Barry and John.
Kurt and Meg.
Yeah, I actually have a question about, I can't find it now in the book, but it's about warmth. It talks about warmth quite a bit, and I wasn't really exactly sure what he meant by that. And I wondered if either you or Barry had something to say about what that means to you.
I'm unclear what the question is, Meg.
Did you hear it? I said it's about, he was talking
Warmth.
about
Warmth. And are you just asking what warmth means to us in this context of this chapter?
Yeah, I wasn't really clear about it. And I can't find the sentence now in the context, but why of all words would he choose warmth to describe
Emptiness.
emptiness? I'm sorry, it's not a very good question because I can't find the sentence in the book, but he talked about it quite a bit. And so-
No, he did. He did talk about it. And let's see. He says, non-reference point comes from openness, friendliness, and warmth. It comes from compassion, which is absolutely necessary, and compassion comes from awareness. You see, they go together. Non-reference point, awareness, compassion, they're part of the same thing. When one gives up the I and other and begins to move into this atmosphere of reality, which has no reference points in it. The reference points are I and other. When you give that up and you begin to move into this, it's so freeing. And not only is it freeing, but it's much more vivid, literally, to the eye. Because you're no longer distracted. No longer, you know how it is, a person can be thinking so hard that you can go up to them and they won't see you. You can say their name and they don't hear it because they're so lost in thought. That's extreme, but there are degrees of that. And the thought of I and other, these thoughts that we go through our days with, gray out the world. And so when we begin to penetrate that, the bodhisattva begins to let that go, is a better word perhaps. This warmth of the world begins to arise. It's naturally there. It's the world is warm. And it's partly the warmth that we're seeing, and it's partly the warmth that we're feeling. It's hard to, I think, to distinguish between them. They go together. And this is the warmth of the bodhisattva. And the person becomes much friendlier, warmer, because they're no longer engaged in this I-other struggle, which is so mean and so frightening in one degree or another. And so there's a tremendous friendliness and love that begins to develop in the world.
Okay.
Which reminds me, I ought to turn on my lights. It's getting dark here in Colorado. Hold on a second.
Well, when he comes back, I think, Stefan, you're back at your computer now, and you had something.
Barry, did you want to say anything about that, about the warmth?
No, I was a little unclear about that too, but
Okay, yeah, I got it.
that was my take on it, John.
Okay. Stefan, haven't seen you in a long, long time.
Yeah, I just walked in at the end there, and I was really appreciating those very pithy words, and it called to me a question. I was rereading Jeremy's book, The Warrior King of Shambhala, and there's this interesting point there, because when you start talking about no effort and all, the path is happening in itself, and the problem is anything that you are trying to manipulate or effort, that kind of how can I say, almost idealistic things in a very idealistic way. This moment in the book, Rinpoche throws us to a meeting of directors and people that his privy council. What do we think? What do you think is the problem with the regent? I mean, in his behavior. And the answer that he thought was the best, it's very short, so I'll read it to you. the quality that made him the regent, a purity that somehow was not caught in worldly things, was the same quality that was giving rise to the problems. He didn't seem to care how he behaved, whether he was endangering himself or going against conventional norms in a harmful way. And that was the explanation that Rinpoche confirmed as the one that jived with him. So the question when we start to talk in terms like this kind of, how can I say, getting rid of the structure of the forms and being kind of this totally liberated into the spontaneity of the moment, is distinguishing between impulse and spontaneity. There are things, that we feel like doing, and they kind of along the lines of first thought, best thought. But well, first thought can be that impulse, and it gets people into trouble. Certainly, I do believe that it was the great plan to have, how can I say, the transition of leadership after he passed. I don't think that was.
No, none of these people know about this.
Okay, then maybe you can parse the question out of this, because I don't want to go on. Thank you. I'm sorry to go on too long about that. But what I wanted to bring it to is when you start to talk about this kind of liberation from any norms or effort, etc., it seems that why we don't do that is because of such things that can happen in a totally. The reason we have conventions is,
I think we're ahead. I think you're getting too far ahead.
Okay.
You're into the realm of crazy wisdom.
Okay.
And we're nowhere near that yet.
Okay. Well, I'll make just one last mention of something that immediately followed that. Maybe you might say something about that. And that was his declaration of the big no. The danger of letting these impulses, etc., indulging in the world. Is there something that you might qualify the kind of sense of utter abandonment of rules, restrictions, etc., with that no? Is there something that comes to your mind to say about that?
I think the relationship with the teacher is all important, especially at the higher levels of the path. In fact, the farther you go on the path, the more important the relationship with the teacher is. And it's only the teacher that can deal with some of these problems. But I really don't want to go into this because
okay, all right.
we don't have the foundation.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trip, you had a comment.
And you can.
So I'm looking in the section meditation without technique or goal, and I have kind of two questions. The first one is, it says here, if there is little experience of Vipassana awareness or pranja-like wakefulness, then the Shunyata experience becomes just a bundle of vague nothingness, which doesn't mean anything. And I'm curious that that observation against also not trying. So if you are, on the path and working through your Vipassana, basically through your practice, and you have moments along the way where, at least I'm speaking for myself, where I would say my Vipassana awareness or pranja-like wakefulness is, in fact, a bundle of vague nothingness. And one, is that part of the path? I'm thinking it is part of the path, but then what to do if what to do is nothing?
You see, right now, you're looking at me and you're hearing these words and there's no effort. In fact, if you were to make an effort, it would obscure your hearing of these words. That lack of effort is the lack of effort of pure awareness. And when we practice Vipassana and we come back, all of you are hearing these words and seeing this image on the computer screen. And when you make an effort, your mind goes off, but then you come back and it's effortless. This is the fundamental nature of true awareness, that it is effortless because it's already here. We just come back to it. This is the nature of this path. When you get to the highest levels of the path, there are only two practices, and the most fundamental of them is effortless awareness. So, lack of effort. You give up that effort and you come back. See, effort is a distraction. You've got some goal in mind. You're thinking about something. I ought to do this. I ought to do that. And meanwhile, you just did it. You were off. You were looking down at your desk. You were thinking about something. You were reading something. You're coming up with a new question. Maybe I don't know what. But now you're back. And when you come back, it's effortless. That is so important. It's really one of the fundamental qualities of awareness. You can speak of awareness and it's aware, and it's not, there's no effort. Effort only obscures it. So when you practice Vipassana and you go out with the breath, right? And the breath is dissolving. And at the end of the out breath, just here, effortless. And when the effort comes in, like you're thinking, am I doing it right? Have I got it? It obscures it. But you can go out, dissolve, and here we are. We're already here. So it's not like you have to make it happen. You know, it's really a letting go into this.
Yes, and you caught me exactly with what I was doing. So nicely. So quick follow-up question then. So he uses the word they could be devastated. Just prior to that sentence that I read, he said that Nagarjuna quite rightly said that if people viewed Shonyata wrongly, if they viewed it with very little prajna, they could be devastated.
Right.
And just to understand it, is that hyperbole and referring to what you were just talking about?
I think I'm not sure. I don't have it in front of me. My guess is that what he's referring to here is, that statement, the arhats had heart attacks. If you think of Shunyata as sort of a devastation of your world, of everything that you hold dear, but it's not. If anything, he used to do this game, he loved these games. There's a game of what is nothing, what is zero, And if you go, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, you've got a zero that is actually something. It's not a true nothing because it's relative to one. Yeah? Follow? It's a concept. It's relative to one. It's a thought. It's an idea. True zero, which is absolutely nothing, encompasses everything, the entire universe. And that is what Shunyata is. Shunyata is a clarity. It's a clarity because it's the absence of I and other and everything that adheres in those two ideas. Once you've got I and other, you've got endless complications, games, projects, hatreds, jealousies, all this stuff, conflicting emotions. But in the absence of that, the twofold absence, sometimes these are called the two veils. The veil of those are the veils of conflicting emotions and primitive beliefs about reality, but they're the veils of I and other, and the sword of Manjushri cuts through them both. And then this clarity is revealed in which can arise the vividness, the beauty. This is why art was so important to him, and it is to some of our Sangha members here, because art arises in this clarity, in this openness, so much more powerfully and vividly and beautifully. And in fact, art becomes an expression of the emptiness, and not only an expression, but a way into it. It can become a tool like meditation if it's done properly.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful.
Well, we're almost to the end here. And I think we probably ought to end at this point. And we'll continue tomorrow in the discussion group. I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say. It's been a lot of me and Barry tonight. So let's end. We'll end with the dedication of merit. Is that okay? There we go. I'm going to put this up on the screen. Let's see, maybe we ought to go into gallery view for this, Barry. What do you think? Where can we go? Sarah, do you want to lead us?
Yes, thank you. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you so much, Barry and John.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, everyone.